Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. This is where we take the big resilience research and best practices and break them down into small bite-sized pieces that we can begin using immediately to strengthen ourselves and others. What if you could learn with an experienced international trauma and resilience trainer? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could learn keys and tips to expand your self-awareness and self-development? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is Lisa Cherry, who's joining us from the UK. I have taught with Lisa in Chicago, in London, and now she is visiting Iowa as part of the Institute's Resilience First Aid project this week. We are thrilled to have her in Iowa, snowy Iowa at the time, so I know you're very resilient. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Mollie.
So let's start with looking at emotional trauma. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, trauma is such a powerful word, isn't it, that I think can leave people feeling quite uncomfortable and taken aback. But it came about as a way of describing the impact on the brain of a traumatic experience or a number of ongoing traumatic experiences. And it really came about through a number of disciplines working together, such as neuroscience and psychology and biology, to what Dan Siegel calls interpersonal neurobiology when thinking about the impact of trauma upon our physiology, upon our brain.
And how about resilience? I know many people think it's something you have or you don't, but how do you see resilience?
It's really interesting because I'm over here in the US, and I've been hearing lots of different words that strike me as incompatible with what I understand and what the science tells us resilience is. Resilience is built in the context of our relationships. It's not something that we can just have as a character trait, that we might say some people have it and some people don't. Or I've been hearing the term very much grit, this idea that you just kind of battle through something and you're going to make it, and if you don't, you just haven't battled hard enough. There's something intrinsically implicit in that understanding that everything sits inside the individual and that you're just not trying hard enough. And that just is not what we know and what we understand. Resilience, we know and we understand, is something that's built in our relationships, that we are part of an ecosystem of the people in our close network, the people in our community, and the society that we're living in.
And we've had many discussions about grit, not one of my favorite words as well. So you're saying a key piece of resilience is connectedness. I know another key piece is self-care. Talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's that intersection, isn't it? We want to do better and we want to strengthen our resolve, but we do that in the context with the availability of what's around us. But part of what I believe supports our part in that process, that relational process, is how we take care of ourselves. So that self-care, and again, self-care can sound very, very indulgent, like it's something like going to a spa or something. But when I think about self-care, I'm thinking about making sure that you sleep for 7 or 8 hours, making sure that you eat wholesome food that supports your system nutritionally, making sure that you are surrounded by people who either have your back or care about you or want to propel you in some way and want to support and nurture you, not toxic relationships. So self-care then becomes very much about understanding what our systems need in order to thrive, and then being able to give that to ourselves. And of course, these are really complex things because they depend upon what we're dealing with, how we're feeling about ourselves, what's going on in our life. But that's the goal, and that's part of ensuring that we are strengthening our ability to not just build resilience, but to heal and to recover. And that's something that takes time and practice and commitment.
So we have all these things going on around us, within us. What role does self-awareness play in this process of recovery and resilience?
Well, here's the thing. You can't change something if you don't know that it's there. So awareness is a key element and a key component in altering some of the messages that reside within us about how we view the world, how we see ourselves, about what we deserve, about our story, what's happened to us. Awareness affords us the opportunity to be an observer of our subconscious, because then we have a chance to see what it is that we keep telling ourselves about the world. And it's only when we notice those stories that we can do something about them. Otherwise, we can't. It's very difficult to do something about something if you don't know that it's there.
And I've heard when you speak and train, I've heard you say something I find quite profound about the ability to meet other people. What do you say about that?
We can only meet other people in our work as deeply as we've been prepared to meet ourselves. We have to be able to walk a journey in order to have some idea of what that journey might look like for somebody else.
And then one of the final pieces of resilience is self-regulation, is staying centered or within our window of tolerance. Can you speak to that a bit?
I wish I'd understood my physiology, biology, and what was going on for me with my stress response system years ago. It would have saved me so much difficulty. But the issue is, if we understand how we need to manage our systems, and we learn how to regulate some of those really difficult feelings that are going on for us, that gives us the space to do all that other stuff.
That was a great job covering the foundations, and we're just getting started. So tool number 1, you can only meet someone as deeply as you've met yourself. Lisa's personal story of trauma and resilience when we come back.
With TiVo, you can record shows to watch later, of course, but you can also access popular video apps right on your TV. And you can watch your recordings or stream live TV on your mobile device, making any screen in your home a TV screen. TiVo's free app even lets you schedule your recordings when you're not at home.
Seriously, you have to watch this show.
Don't mind if I do. With TiVo, you'll never have to miss a thing. For special offers on TiVo, call 888-SIMPLIFY. When you download the Mediacom Connect mobile care app, you can troubleshoot issues, look at your data usage, pay your bill, get appointment reminders, and even schedule a time for us to call you without ever leaving the couch. It's like having your own customer service agent.
Remember, your TiVo install is tomorrow.
And technician right in your phone. Mediacom Connect Mobile Care. Download the free app today from iTunes or Google Play.
This is your escape from a long day, your Tuesday night routine. It's the 1 hour you reserve just for you. Right now, it's the only thing that will calm him down. That's why at Mediacom, we're working harder to bring you more superior TV entertainment every day. Greater reliability, incredible picture and sound. So from the big screen to the little screen, to the great outdoors, nothing gets in the way of the things you love.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we're speaking with Lisa Cherry, an international trauma and resilience trainer. And Lisa, you mentioned your personal story, or the power of a story, a personal narrative in recovering from trauma. Tell us more about that.
Well, for me, I very much found that, so my backstory, and you know, again, this is very much about people who tend to work in the trauma field, I think have experienced things that have led them into that work. And my recovery story really started in 1990, after I had experienced being in care, and I'd experienced being homeless, and I found myself in an AA meeting in 1990, and I haven't had a drink since. And it was that experience of discovering, and I didn't have the language of trauma, but it informs everything that I do, because I had that experience where I had to start to deal with my own stuff. Because when I put the drink down, which had been a self-soother, I was left with what I was left with. And so I had to go through the process of healing that. Interestingly, I then went on to work, and we're going to talk, I think, later on about wounded healers. I then went on to work in social work and education, and also had my children. And it wasn't really until about 10 years ago that I became very aware that the primal wound, which Nancy Verrier describes, that primal wound, came to the fore, and I realised I hadn't even begun to really get to the core of some of my unresolved trauma. So I started to write, and it was writing that really supported and helped me start to understand my story. And when we think about narrative, if I wrote those books again today, they would be very different. And that's to do with the fact that things happen and we interpret things based on where we're at in our lives at that time. So writing for me is an incredibly powerful healing tool, because it's an opportunity to reflect back and see the distance that you've travelled. So I feel very passionate about story. Story enables us to connect. Story enables us to heal. Story is what is very much part of Indigenous culture in terms of connection from trauma, and it's very much part of care experience, resolving of trauma, poetry and art and story, in terms of being able to share those things that have happened to us, but also that connect us. And when we connect, then we reduce the shame of those experiences.
In interpreting across the pond a bit, when you say in care, that would be kind of the equivalent of our foster care system, right?
Yeah, so that would be in foster care, or we have also residential care, so like children's homes. We also have kinship care, where you might have children that are looked after by different members of the family. Basically, any situation where children are not able to be cared for at home. Okay. Yeah.
And I know in your work you draw a lot upon Brené Brown's work in shame resilience.
Yeah.
Put that into the puzzle for us of how important that is in that process of working through stigma and shame.
Yeah, so when I was working in social work and education, the really interesting thing about that was that I didn't talk about my experience. And when I look back on that, and when I speak to people, my peers, if you like, it's very clear to me that we have challenges around shame and stigma. And what Brené's work helps us really understand is that when we talk to somebody about things that have happened to us, and that's met with empathy, shame evaporates. And that's a very beautiful thing. And her work is integral, really, in understanding empathy, vulnerability, and shame. And all of those things are part of how we connect with each other. And if we understand that it's in relationships that we can be damaged, then we understand that actually it's in relationships that we can be healed.
So speaking our story, finding safe places in which we can speak our story, be met with empathy, and then continue to write and rewrite those stories is part of that process.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what happens to a child's developing brain when they are exposed to a high level of childhood adversity.
Yeah. So the way that we are built, and again, we used to think that it was nature and nurture. So blame the parents or blame the DNA, whatever, just blame somebody. But we are much more sophisticated now in our understanding because we have managed to work in a cross-disciplined way that tells us that we have the DNA, we have the experiences of the baby growing in the womb, we have the capacity of the primary caregiver, we have the capability of the community, we have the society that that child is born into, and then we have every experience thereafter. What makes early childhood developmental trauma so powerful is that the way that we are growing and building in our internal architecture is happening at, I think it's 700 million neurons are firing a day. Up to 80% of that internal architecture is built in the first 3 years. So, but the key that we mustn't forget is that we have plasticity. So we have that capacity to change that internal architecture, but it does get harder. So if we were really going to change the world, and we were really going to do things better, and we were really going to understand that we're in a paradigm shift about how we are to understand the human condition, then we would invest in our pregnant women. We would invest in antenatal care. We would invest in early years. But I'm also very passionate that we invest across the life course because we have the capacity to grow and to change and to develop and to love and to connect until 3 days after we're dead. I made that bit up.
We get the point. And a point well made. And the field that is kind of trying to get their arms around this, and the term used is trauma-informed care. We talked a bit about self-regulation. Tell us about the work in trauma-informed care.
Well, trauma-informed care is really, at its most simplest form, it's about understanding adaptation, how we develop. And if we take, for example, a situation in a school environment where we have a child who has been living in an environment where there might be domestic violence, there might be some neglect, there's a whole range of things. That child, because that's the way we develop, will adapt to that environment. Because that's what we do. And then they go into a school, and that behaviour that works very well in that environment does not work in a school. And then we punish children. We punish them for being human beings and having adapted to the environment they're in, because that's how human beings grow. So trauma-informed care, trauma-informed practice is about understanding that behaviour is communication, it's telling us something, and that we need to be curious about what that is, rather than the old narrative of there's something wrong with you, or you're mad, bad, or sad, loaded with judgment, loaded with a detachment, rather than a curiosity that helps me explore further with you what might have happened and what might have caused this to be what's going on right now.
The power of curiosity, very well said. So here is your next tool. You are the greatest narrator of your life. If you don't learn to tell your own story will write your life for you. More talk about shame. Stay tuned.
With TiVo, you can record shows to watch later, of course, but you can also access popular video apps right on your TV. And you can watch your recordings or stream live TV on your mobile device, making any screen in your home a TV screen. TiVo's free app even lets you schedule your recordings when you're not at home.
Seriously, you have to watch this show.
Don't mind if I do. With TiVo, you'll never have to miss a thing. For special offers on TiVo, call 888-SIMPLIFY. When you download the Mediacom Connect mobile care app, you can troubleshoot issues, look at your data usage, pay pay your bill, get appointment reminders, and even schedule a time for us to call you without ever leaving the couch. It's like having your own customer service agent
Remember, your TiVo install is tomorrow.
and technician right in your phone. Mediacom Connect Mobile Care. Download the free app today from iTunes or Google Play.
This is your escape from a long day, your Tuesday night routine. It's the 1 hour you reserve just for you. Right now, it's the only thing that will calm him down. That's why at Mediacom, we're working harder to bring you more superior TV entertainment every day. Greater reliability, incredible picture and sound. So from the big screen to the little screen, to the great outdoors, nothing gets in the way of the things you love.
Hi, I'm Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. We are speaking with Lisa Cherry, a resilience and trauma trainer. And earlier, Lisa, you thought we'd get to this, and we are. It's such an important concept. What is a wounded healer?
So a wounded healer is the archetype of a person who goes into working with something that they've experienced. It often refers to that, I think, where there is the trauma is not resolved. Because there are lots and lots of wounded healers who work with people who are vulnerable across all the services. And I think that's a fantastic thing. That's a good thing, except that you have to deal with your stuff. It becomes very problematic if you haven't dealt with your stuff. And if there aren't things in place in organisations to support you to do that, such as clinical supervision, training, a good peer network, so that trauma-informed isn't just about the people using the service, it's ensuring that it's about the staff in that service, also having the right mechanisms and tools and structures in place to support them to be the best placed people to help those other people.
Bringing us back to where we started, of if they've only met themselves to a certain point, if they've only healed to a certain point, they cannot lead someone else past their own point of healing.
Yeah.
Speaking of lived experiences, so we're certainly not saying if you have lived experiences, you shouldn't be in this trauma field, because you're actually a very strong proponent of integrating people with lived experiences into our systems.
I think it's absolutely vital. And it concerns me deeply that we still have services that are done to people. We need all types of people in our services, and it's absolutely imperative that if you're a service, for example, that is to support people who've experienced the criminal justice system, that you need the voices of people who've experienced that system, because you don't know what you don't know. You know, how can you know what you don't know? Recently, I was in the research department looking at my master's dissertation, and when I was doing my review of all the literature around that topic, it became very clear to me that the questions that non-lived experience people ask were very different than the questions than the people with lived experience who were in my research asked. And that gave me a really clear indication, if I needed one, that not having lived experienced voices as part of the way that our services are delivered, created, means that services end up being delivered to people rather than with people. And that means ensuring that the way that people access training, education, to go into those environments has to be user-friendly. It's no good having a system whereby you have somebody going into a vocational training course, for example, social work, if they have to have had a very traditional education trajectory. Because people who've had those experiences tend not to have had a very traditional trajectory at that point. Research shows that later on they may well, but while they're dealing with some of the difficult things they're going to be dealing with when they come out of care, they're unlikely to have had a very traditional educational route. So then make access into social work, for example, more user-friendly for people who have lived experience.
And that was your own path through education.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm very powerful, a powerful advocate for education, and actually research is very clear that education is one of the things that can support a person outside of one socioeconomic state to another. So for me personally, I left school with nothing because I was excluded from school. But luckily, a few years later, the intersection between that desire to want to change and the pathway to enable that to happen was afforded me. And a charity part-funded me to go to university. And I was 21, and it changed my life. The combination of going off to university and getting sober, so having all that emotional learning, devouring Louise Hay books because it was the early 90s, coupled with devouring my sociology texts, changed my life. So inevitably, I'm going to feel very passionate about how we support people who have those experiences to have opportunities and relational opportunities to move forward and to grow and to come away from the very often negative outcomes that people have to face.
And when we've been talking about wounded healers, service providers, certainly educators, there's some special triggers, unique triggers for parents. If we're parenting from a place of unresolved trauma, and you've had some personal experience, you work with a lot of parents, you speak to that before we wrap up here.
Yeah, which is why I'm not entirely wanting us to just focus on working with early years. We have to be working with everybody. We have to be working with everybody, and we have to be working with parents and supporting parents in a way that's non-shaming, in a way that helps support parents to be the very best parents that they can be for their children, by supporting them to work through their unresolved traumas too.
Excellent. So there's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that we need to be looking at, and Lisa, you did a great job of helping us understand those. We're going to put up all three takeaways because they are worth repeating. You can only meet someone as deeply as you met yourself. You are the greatest narrator of your life, so start paying attention to your story. And if we don't welcome a diversity of stakeholders into our systems and services, including those with lived experiences, we run the risk of doing things to people rather than with and for people. Thank you so much again for joining us on Resiliency Matters on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.